How are you?
Great. How are you guys?
Very well.
Fabulous.
Sun is out. We're all wearing our hats. We're all taking care of the top of our heads. Very proud of you all.
Yes, exactly. That's why we're wearing hats, not because we're lazy and don't want to do our hair in the morning. Definitely.
What's hair?
I've started doing my hair from time to time.
I've noticed, yeah.
Breathe. Hair should breathe more often.
Mm-hmm.
When I wear the hats too much, the hair doesn't breathe enough.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
That's what's hurt
Plus,
Patrick and I.
Here's the other thing, Patrick.
In the past.
I'm nearly 50 years old, and I have all my hair.
Oh, listen. Well, okay.
We're very proud of you.
Yes.
Puts me in stark contrast to many of my peers.
So it's a flex. Let's see.
What can you tell us about Nikita Zadorov?
Well, just crickets, I think. Term, I think, a big sticking point. And as I think I said last week, like, why wouldn't this guy look out the front door anyway? It had a huge playoff. He is massive. You know, he ticks off so many boxes that teams are going to want just visually. Now, obviously, there is the rest of the story that people pay attention to in terms of analytics and that. But, you know, big character guy. He's a player, I think, that showed himself well, did everything he could in his favor in the playoffs. So even if he were interested in staying, and you know, clearly he likes Vancouver. Everyone says that. He said that. I think everyone says that. We saw him go golfing with Murph and JT Miller the other day. You know, his kids are in school here, or his kid is in school here. Yeah, I think the Canucks are certainly hopeful. I think that you know, that comfort level and that desire to live here makes a difference. It's made a difference with other players. But in the end, sounds like things are pretty quiet right now.
Everybody workshopping this deal has said 5 years, that blah, blah, blah. So he just turned 29. You certainly don't sign, or I wouldn't sign anybody with their age starting with a 3 to any super long-term deals unless you're a superstar. He just turned 29. Would you consider a 7? Probably not an 8, but a 7-year deal for Zadorov?
I mean, that's a lot to pay for a third pairing defenseman. Right? That's the thing to remember here is that as loud and exciting he is he going to play more than Carson Soucy? He's certainly not going to play more than Quinn Hughes. And, you know, Soucy is not tied up for anything close to that long. And do you see a succession plan? I don't think that's the guy. I enjoy his game. I think he was perfectly slotted for how they used him, especially in the playoffs. So, yeah, committing that long. Listen, if you can get him for that long on $2 million a year, great. But I don't think that's happening.
That's not happening.
There's a long-standing argument you should commit to those guys at low rates because then you can flex around the rest of it. But, you know, even, you know, the Jay Beagle story, of course, $4 million, 4 years. Like, that was absurd. You know, those guys in that range, as loud as exciting as they may be, is not where you should be investing your long-term commitments.
Can I take something on with both of you?
Sure.
Always.
Yeah. I'm
looking forward to this.
It's almost a weekly occurrence here with Patrick now. Calling him a third pair defenseman.
Well, was he not? What was he, Matthew?
He played 20 minutes and 9 seconds per game in the postseason. That was third amongst Canucks defensemen after Hughes and Roenick.
Sure.
That was a full 3 minutes plus more than Carson Soucy.
I'm comfortable with him playing as much as Carson Soucy for sure. I am.
Well, so that's my point here. Are we not talking about a guy who jumped Carson Soucy in the postseason and became their second pair?
I mean, Carson Soucy's only a $3.2 million defenseman. I think the Canucks are allowed to and probably will have to sign a defenseman this year, probably on the right side. But you know what I mean? Who's going to make more than $3.2 million? Like $3.2 million is not a lot as your third most paid defenseman.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. Look at the regular season. They were pretty equivalent in terms of, right? They leaned on Zadorov because he was playing great. Like, absolutely. You're totally right, Matt. Like, in the end, in crunch time, they leaned on him heavy. It worked out great. But in the regular season, that was not the story. And you know, your baseline is what you need to remember, not the big, huge, exciting moment, but the baseline. I mean, if you're paying a guy for his playoffs, I mean, that is the point. That's what I think he's going to try to do. But the baseline here was a guy that was pretty good in the regular season, but had some moments. And I think realistically, at the trade deadline, weren't 100% committed to, because they were trying to make other things happen. I don't think they were actively trying to get rid of him, but I don't think he was a guy they're saying that they wouldn't stay, or that they were going to hold on to, if that meant, say, I don't know, getting Chris Tanev, right? Like there were other things they were trying to make happen. They liked him, but in the end, it played out well for him, and obviously played out well for the Canucks in the moment. But in the long run, it's going to be a different story, I think.
Yeah, Susie played 17 minutes and 29 seconds per game in the regular season. Zadorov played 17:04. Susie's ice time actually went down in the playoffs, dipped below 17 minutes, whereas Zadorov's shot skyward.
The other thing to consider, guys, is just, should they spend every cent that everybody wants to spend on Nikita Zadorov? Should they spend that on Brett Pesce? And
that's it.
And overpay on the right side to make sure you're settled for your top four at the very least.
Well, you'd be paying for a guy that's a year older than Phil Hronek. It depends on what you do with Hronek. Like, I have no sense of. I thought for a while they weren't. We talked about this before. Hronek obviously has a skill set that helps, but if they could find an alternative, I do think they would like to try to do that. And Pesce, who is a bigger defenseman, a right shot defenseman, roughly the same age, not as necessarily offensively skilled, but still pretty handy with the puck. I just, having seen Talk at work and what his preferences are, I think he'd rather have a larger guy with Quinn Hughes than two little guys playing together. That's, I think, the overall philosophy. Whether it's right or wrong, that's what I think they're looking at. Which is why they liked, in the end, what they were hoping to get from Zadorov, and what they got in the playoffs from Zadorov was to their satisfaction. That's what they want.
We asked yesterday on our poll question, if you're going to overpay for one of these free agents, who are you overpaying for? Hronek, Joshua, Zadorov, or just flat refuse to overpay? What do you think the Canucks will do, and what would you do?
I think that's a fantastic question. I like how you framed it too. To me, I think you said Hronek for you, right? Which the overpay on Hronek is probably, in relative terms, is not the same as, say, an overpay on Joshua. But then again, Joshua's not signed for long term. I've made it pretty clear. I think Joshua, of that group, is the guy that you really want to bring back, just because of the age, because of the sort of the curve you've seen, and also realistically, you're probably not having to sign him for too long a term. Term is a question on all these guys. Hronek's offensive skill set, I think we know that first half of the season, there was a reason why he put up so many points. It wasn't just that he was playing with Quinn Hughes. That said, he struggled when he got injured, and I think you can see why you might want to look at somebody else for the overall context I mentioned before. What do you want your pair to look like? It doesn't have to be Chris Tanev, but you would like a guy that plays a similar way, can move the puck in a similar way, has sort of the same baseline skill set as Hronek. You don't necessarily worry about the production. I think in the end, you'd rather not overpay for anybody, but you're probably in the circumstances going to have to accept that some guys that you want to keep, or you're going to sign from elsewhere, are going to go for more than you might have budgeted, just because there's more money in the system this summer. Just there are so many teams with cap space, and the cap's going up, right? Like that's the biggest thing. The Canucks are actually one of the teams with the most space to work with, but they're not alone in having, was it 26 million? Like, there's a bunch of teams that are in that range. They have to do a fair bit of work. Like, I think they know that their lineup may look very different next year. But it's not impossible. It's not like, they're not like the Oilers, who have $10 million and 8 guys to sign, and on and on and on.
And the other thing, Peach, is this summer you have to account for the Utah club, because they're going to spend.
Yeah, exactly.
Arizona never used to. Chicago still has tons of space, and they're
the Venom. The Venom are going to spend.
So Chicago, and San Jose. So you have teams out there that are bad, that are going to spend on top of the cap space that other teams have, on top of the cap going up. So no, you're quite right. I think it's going to be a very competitive marketplace, and I don't begrudge these agents or players at all for saying, no, I'm going to go to free agency and see what the market bears, because I have a feeling that some of those contracts are going to come in way over and above what the final offer was from their existing clubs.
The thing that interested me just on that point about Utah is that Arizona for so long, I think, was kind of seen as this safety valve dumping ground, and they would absorb a certain amount of league-wide mistakes just because they were required to carry players and have a cap hit.
They're like the Caymans. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They were the Cayman Islands of the NHL. Exactly. Yeah. And that's not going to be it anymore. There isn't a team like that right now. There are teams with cap space, obviously San Jose and Utah literally spring to mind, Chicago, but those are all teams that claim to have a plan and claim to actually be trying to win and not just pretend that we're building for the future. No, you're cutting salary because your owner doesn't have any money. Like, we're not living in that universe, at least not right now, as far as I know of any other team in the NHL. Alex Morello gets to sit in the corner and be an AHL owner. With that in mind, not that I think Patrick Allvin's a guy that has been looking for ways out the way Jim Benning used to, or other managers like that. But I do think certainly here they're going to be conscious of the fact that there really is no room for error, that you have to nail every one of these signings.
12 teams, so more than a third of the league have 20 million or more in cap space, and we should shout Columbus too, because Saravelli tells us he thinks Columbus is going to get active, not to mention Buffalo with 23 million in cap space and having to finally take the next steps. There's a lot of lurkers there.
The Canucks probably won't buy out, but we were talking about this yesterday. Do teams buy out players because they've got the cap space now too? They can absorb it a little bit and it saves them money down the road.
Yeah, like McKay, it's not a nightmare, but I don't think you want two buyouts sitting on your cap.
No,
whatever it is, structure.
Yeah. I was looking at Jack Campbell in Edmonton. It's an easy buyout, actually. And
I think that's one that, like, you look at all the variables that Edmonton's facing, and it's hard to imagine them not doing that. But yeah, Edmonton just has to work with. Like, there's no space, and they have, Connor Brown, and there's the Connor Brown. I know people are probably tired of hearing about Edmonton. Connor Brown's got the overage, and that's going to be a cap penalty, and they got a bunch of decisions to make there, and not a lot of stuff underneath right now. They're kind of looked familiar, although obviously their top end's amazing. There are things that are going to happen. I think things are going to be active, whether it's just standing back. You don't even need to talk to anybody. You just sit back and look at the system, the way the system's set up. There's a lot of room for movement. Teams that are going to want to maybe reshuffle their makeup. Trading Phil Hronek isn't easy because of that, the arbitration thing. But if that's something they're going to do, like I think, but I'm not certain it's something they're going to do. How they make up their blue line is going to be really interesting to watch. And I wrote about this last week. And Zadorov, Hronek, obviously top of the list, but sounds like Ian Cole's going to walk, and they'd like to bring Myers back. But they need to think long and hard about what their defense core was. Why it was pretty good last year, worked pretty well. And if you're going to try to sort of reset that, you need to keep that in mind as well. And it's not going to be an easy task given the competition.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful chaos coming.
Yeah. Have you noted how much of the free agent question also overlaps with the special teams question?
Yeah.
When you look at all the penalty killing forwards who are free agents, not to mention defensemen, although I think is coming back. And then, of course, a big one on the power play side, where if no Lindholm, then, what to do there.
Yeah. That was an obvious thing that obvious item that they need to figure out, that essentially Bo Horvat replacement. It wasn't really Kuzmenko. It was really Bo Horvat. Yeah. We needed to find a trigger man in there, in the bumper. PK, Teddy Bluger is also free agent. Ian Cole was he not the number one penalty killing time guy? By the way, Rick Tocchet scooping me on the radio this morning. I had heard that Adam Foote would be running the PK, but and a big task for him, right? Like a guy who's come a long way, who a year and a half ago was not in the NHL, had never stood on an NHL bench. And as Tocchet told me mid-season, had developed 1,000,000% as a coach in just, 8 or 9 months, 10 months. And now he's going to have to help this team figure out how to PK, which, obviously came a long way over the season. We're league average, but in the end held the Oilers to serve, right? I mean, the Canucks in the end lost the special teams battle, not because their PK failed, but because their power play couldn't score, right? Like that in many ways is the story of that series. And that's why the Oilers beat the Stars. The Oilers shut down the Stars power play. So getting the Canucks' PK to at least where it was this year, and if not better, is a huge task for Foot. And
do you buy the theory now that the PK is more important than the PP in the power play?
No, well,
in the playoffs.
No, I think in the end, scoring goals is what matters, right? Like, look at the Oilers. The reason why the Oilers are where they are is because their offense kept running, right? Like the Canucks slowed down their power play, but at the end of the day, the Oilers are just scoring goals in bunches, and they've scored goals in bunches since the end of November, and that's more than anything what matters the most. Like people inside the game will tell you that goaltending is, you figure out what you can. Woodley will tell you can figure out everything. But you set your defensive structure as best you can. But at the end of the day, scoring goals is what matters. And that's what teams are focused on and how to make it happen. And that's what I think Rick Tocchet's going to be thinking about all summer.
Look at the long history of the Stanley Cup and who wins. It's typically really good offensive teams.
Yeah.
Occasionally an airtight defensive team breaks through and wins, but more often than not, it's teams that can score goals, which is, why that's sort of the next level of coaching. You can, talk about how you're a systems guy and an identity guy and hard to play against and goal prevention. And that's the essence of what your job is as a head coach. Completely right.
Yeah.
But even if you put, as you say, or as Kevin says, you put all that into place, it still may not be enough.
I just saw the Bill Torrey quote today, and any coach can make somebody play defense. Only God can make a score.
Well, I'd say to some degree.
With that in mind, PJ, is it wrong for the Canucks to have even small hopes that Jonathan Lekkerimaki makes this team? Like, should they just put that out of their minds, or is it reasonable that a 20-year-old can come in and win a spot on this team?
It's totally reasonable, whether he is ready to do it, because he's not, in the end, he's a guy that figured it out finally playing against men last year in the SHL. The defensemen are bigger in the NHL, and they're just better at it. And I think that is the fascinating challenge in the big picture for him, period, of whether he's going to make it or not. Canucks, of course, believe that he will. But he's not a big kid.
But you're not going to hope that he comes in and scores 35 next year. I think you're hoping he comes in and has a Hoglander season, something like that.
Where are you playing him? Like, I mean, I guess if they're so weak at winger, you can drop him in the top 6. Is that the idea?
Oh, yeah.
Because you're not scoring in the bottom.
In the long run, he's got to be there. So, this is the thing, right? Like, risk is the game, right? You have to be willing to give the kids a chance, but you have to also know that the kid is ready. So if the kid's not ready, you don't give, it's not going to work. So the question is he ready? Is he physically strong enough to deal with the wear and tear that is required of playing his position in the NHL, which is a goal scorer, guy who needs to get to the net, needs to get inside. Like, listen, Brock Besser is not the tallest guy, but he's big. He's a strong kid, right? Like, is Jonathan Lekkerimaki ready? Has he put on enough muscle? I stood next to him in the food line, the media meal pregame, I think game 7. And, he's a well-built kid, but he's still a kid. And it's it is a big step from the AHL to the NHL, and certainly the Canucks would love it. I mean, I know the Canucks definitely need him, and certainly Elias Pettersson, the defenseman, and they hope for Tom Willander to break into this lineup in the next couple of seasons because of the cap. Like, those guys are going to be cheap deals. They need them in there. There's simply no other way for them to really sustain this window without those guys being ready and being able to step in. Is Lekkerimaki going to be ready at training camp? I have no idea. But certainly we've seen stories in the past of players who were ready, needed a half year in the AHL, and then they step in, and by the second half of the season, they're ready to go. And I think at the end of the day, that's the most likely path here, that they certainly would hope that he's ready to go in the second half.
Be gobsmacked if he played well in the early part of the season. It's not only a big step from the Swedish League to the NHL, but for a winger in
Yeah.
this system, it is entirely different on the small ice. So I would think if anything, Lekkerimaki is a second half guy. Which brings us to the staff, or at least the previous discussion got us off the Lekkerimaki. So what do you make of everything they've done here?
Well, I mean,
do you understand it? And like what are the reasons behind it? Like what's wrong with the head coach and two primary full-time assistants, model that a lot of teams have?
It's nothing. I mean, this is the thing that the thing I thought a lot about this season was, people kept, oh, look how many coaches on the ice. I'm like, good. Like this is where you should be. The evolution, I mean, I think there's a lot of parts to this. And so just bear with me, but there's the evolution of how they think about development and coaching needs. And assignments. So, the Sedins, their original notion was to sort of learn about how it works, learn a bit about coaching, develop, figure out how to talk to players and what matters and this kind of stuff. And originally, kind of just Navisford, then this year was kind of a bit of everywhere. By the playoffs, apparently, one of them would be on the road helping out. We did see Sergei Gonchar when he was here fairly often was the eye in the sky guy. They're evolving parts. And then beyond that, I mean, part of it's the Chris Higgins story. Chris Higgins is, not involved in development because I guess in the end, he was part of the old sort of setup, and they've really dialed in on how Michael Samuelson and Mike Komisarek are working, and how they are engaging with players, and to a degree, Marco Terenius, because he's the goalie coach in Abbotsford, but also working with some of the kids. And just sort of seeing how the roles and responsibilities were going to flesh around. And at the end of the day, the Sedins ready to take on new tasks, and you learn more about what they're able to do and what they're ready to do. And I have no doubt that's some of the story here. Mike Yeo, the thing that's interesting in all this was Mike Yeo, they made him an offer, right? It wasn't a huge offer, but they made him an offer. They were interested enough in the coach to keep him. And he went for basically more security in Ottawa. Was clearly a solid NHL coach. As we said, I think last week, assistant coaches change all the time. They once you reach a certain standard, you're in it, but you're not necessarily always going to be in the same team. So from that standpoint, it did surprise me that they haven't brought anybody in. I mean, this is talk. It's kind of second go around. Here's a guy who thinks endlessly about how his staff works and how things move around and how things evolve. And so the fact that they are down a guy, I mean, I guess they'll hire a new skills coach, a guy who's a specialist, does a lot of stuff. I mean, Swiatkowski was on the ice all the time. It wasn't like he wasn't part of this coaching staff, right? Like he was on the ice here more than I expected he would be, because originally the idea was that he was going to be on the ice in Abbotsford a lot. But he was a guy that clearly built a rapport and runs practices. You can see he knows skills. Like he definitely knows that. And so it makes sense.
Systems too, more than just skills too. So
yeah, that's what I mean. Like he's been in this game. Like he's been studying and paying attention to hockey for a long time. So yeah, adding him to the staff, yeah, it makes sense. And there is a bit of that mentality of upwards, building upwards and finding new roles for people that are inside your own house, and you work from below and bring them up. So, there in a way is how it's worked out with him. It still surprises me because a lot of it does still, like the Colleton thing and the fact that he was a guy that they lauded and were so in favor of, and then clearly it came down to money, and Yeo got more term, and Rick Tocchet is on a year plus a team option, and I mean it's obviously a business, and so you think about that, but you still can't help but think about the sort of money, and these are the detail parts of running the business that do matter. And I think there have been people in the past, and certainly I think I have, that criticize ownership for not necessarily being willing to spend beyond the shop window. And so you do wonder about that. That said, this management team seems pretty happy, and this coaching staff seems pretty happy. So we'll see how it goes out. I mean, they need to figure out the power play. They need to figure out the PK. Those are the big tasks, and this is the staff they have, and apparently they think they can do it.
And the other thing is I think Taka deserves the benefit of the doubt here.
Sure.
Yeah.
For season. So we'll see how all of this. We'll see how all of.
Let me
this
ask you
works.
this: how far are we away from having a Sedin on the bench on a nightly basis?
I don't think we're that far. Like, I think that's part of it too, right? Like these are guys. There's
going on the road, right?
Well, one of them's exactly. Like, they're going to be on the road. So whether they're on the bench or they're eye in the sky, like, I mean, that's it is a different coaching model. The Gonchar element where he's not always here is a different way of doing it, but there's a connection there, and the fact that he's around a lot and that he's able to talk with the players and text and that is the other thing, of course, is that's how people communicate and that's how people engage with each other. And it's not just face to face anymore, even if us crusty old guys think it should be all face to face. They are trying new things here, and benefit of the doubt. Matt's absolutely right. Like,
when they climb the ladder, who's the head coach and who's the assistant coach between Daniel and Henrik? Is it just assumed that it's Henrik because he was the captain? He's the older.
Well, maybe it's a coach. Does it matter? Like, I don't know. It's probably going to be a one guy. Like, our instinct says that it's always been one guy, but
maybe
they're different.
There, you're breaking the mold. Coaches. No.
I don't think it is. I don't think it is either. I think they will be on their own, and one will be here, and one will be somewhere else. I think you're right.
I don't think they want to be coaches.
What do they want to be, Matt?
Oh, I think they want to be managers.
Yeah, fair enough. Co-general manager, co-presidents.
Could work. Yeah,
works in Andorra.
How do you know
Andorra, is that one of the European micro countries?
Yes. How do you know the political climate of?
They have co-presidents or co-dukes or something. I don't even know. It's the president of France and the king of Spain, or the co-rulers of
cool.
I don't know why. I think it's because of the Tour de France and goes through there once in a while. I'm trying to remember if I did like a grade 5 project. I think I did like a grade 5 project on Andorra, but I don't remember knowing the co-presidents thing.
Andorra heads of government, head of state, Archbishop Joan Enrique Vives y Chichilla. Head of state, Mr. Emmanuel Macron. Head of government, Mr. Xavier Espot Zamora. All of them referred to as Your Excellency.
Oh, try heads of state. Wow. Unbelievable. There you go. You learned something.
Next, we'll talk about Liechtenstein.
I was going to say
San Marino.
Far enough. Much as I like the San Marino Grand Prix,
yes,
and the downhill skiers from Luxembourg, we're going to catch up next week.
Luxembourg's small medium now.
Girardelli, right?
Yeah.
Hey, everybody! If you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres and Price on YouTube. I promise more content coming.
The kids call it subscribe on YouTube.
Well, how about liking it?
Do that as well. Smash it right now.